The roar of the crowd had finally died away. The sand-covered arena floor, moments before soaked in blood and echoing with the clash of steel, now lay empty beneath the scorching Roman sun. For the gladiators who survived another day of combat, the end of the games marked only the beginning of a different kind of ordeal. But for the women connected to these spectacles of death, the conclusion of each event brought horrors that history has largely forgotten. What happened to them in the shadows of the Colosseum reveals a darkness that even the brutal games themselves could not match. The year was 79 AD, and Rome had reached the pinnacle of its power. The empire stretched from the frozen forests of Britain to the burning sands of Egypt, and at its heart stood the greatest arena the world had ever known. The Colosseum could hold 50,000 screaming spectators, all gathered to witness the systematic slaughter that had become Rome's most beloved entertainment. Yet while historians have extensively documented the fate of gladiators, the women whose lives were intertwined with these games have remained largely invisible to history. Their stories, preserved in scattered accounts and archaeological evidence, paint a picture of suffering that makes the arena's bloodshed seem almost merciful by comparison. The women we speak of were not merely passive observers of these spectacles. They were wives of gladiators, daughters of trainers, slaves purchased specifically for the games, and even free citizens who found themselves trapped in the brutal machinery of Roman entertainment. Some were there by choice, drawn by the promise of wealth or status. Others had been sold into this world as children, knowing no other existence. All would discover that proximity to Rome's grandest spectacle came with a price measured not in gold but in human dignity and suffering. When the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the arena and the last body was dragged away by hook-wielding slaves, these women faced a reality that no amount of crowd adulation could soften. The gladiatorial schools, or ludi, where fighters trained and lived, became prisons for the women connected to them. Here, in cramped underground chambers beneath the training grounds, they endured conditions that would have horrified even hardened Roman soldiers. The stone walls wept with moisture, creating an environment where disease spread like wildfire through the overcrowded quarters. The economic structure of the gladiatorial system created a particularly cruel trap for women. Unlike male gladiators who could earn their freedom through victories, women in the ludus existed in a perpetual state of servitude. They were considered property, valued only for their ability to produce future fighters or provide services to the current ones. Records from Pompeii reveal the systematic nature of this exploitation, with detailed inventories listing women alongside weapons and armor as assets of the gladiatorial schools. The daily routine for these women began before dawn and continued long after the last spectator had left the arena. They prepared food for hundreds of fighters, maintained equipment that kept gladiators alive, and tended to wounds that ranged from minor cuts to injuries so severe that survival was unlikely. The medical knowledge they possessed was born of necessity rather than training. They learned to recognize the difference between wounds that would heal and those that meant certain death simply by observing hundreds of injured men over countless days. More disturbing were the expectations placed upon them beyond their basic duties. Roman society viewed gladiators as sexually desirable despite their low social status, and the women in the ludus were expected to cater to these desires whether they wished to or not. Archaeological evidence from gladiatorial quarters reveals small chambers that served no purpose related to training or equipment storage, suggesting spaces designed for activities that contemporary sources only hint at in euphemistic language. The psychological toll of this existence extended far beyond physical hardship. These women lived in constant awareness that the men they served, tended, and often formed relationships with would likely die violent deaths in the arena. Contemporary accounts describe the particular anguish experienced by women who had formed emotional attachments to gladiators, knowing that each trip to the games might be the last time they saw their partners alive. Some developed a protective emotional numbness, deliberately avoiding close relationships to spare themselves repeated grief. The aftermath of particularly brutal games brought its own horrors. When multiple gladiators from a single school died in the arena, the women left behind faced immediate practical crises. Their value to the ludus diminished with the death of the fighters they had served, making them vulnerable to being sold to other schools, brothels, or private owners whose intentions were rarely benevolent. Records indicate that some women took their own lives rather than face transfer to even worse conditions. Children born in the gladiatorial schools faced predetermined fates that reflected the cynical calculations of their owners. Boys were evaluated for potential as future fighters, while girls were assessed for their likely usefulness in maintaining the ludus. Those deemed unsuitable for either purpose often disappeared from the records entirely, their fate left to imagination. The few children who showed promise faced the cruelest destiny of all, being raised specifically to perpetuate the cycle of violence and exploitation that had claimed their parents. The social isolation experienced by these women was perhaps as devastating as their physical suffering. Roman society viewed association with gladiators as contaminating, making it nearly impossible for women in the ludus to maintain connections with the outside world. Even those who had originally been free citizens found themselves permanently marked by their association with the games. This social death was deliberate, designed to ensure that once someone entered the gladiatorial system, escape became not just physically difficult, but socially impossible. Religious practices within the gladiatorial schools reveal another layer of psychological manipulation. While gladiators often worshipped gods associated with war and death, the women were encouraged to venerate deities of fate and acceptance. Shrines dedicated to goddesses who represented submission and endurance have been found in the ruins of several ludi, suggesting a systematic effort to break the spirits of women who might otherwise resist their circumstances. The medical evidence from gladiatorial sites provides disturbing insights into the health consequences faced by women in these environments. Skeletal remains show signs of malnutrition, repetitive stress injuries from constant labor, and evidence of violence that extended beyond the arena itself. Dental analysis reveals diets consisting largely of grain porridge and scraps, leading to widespread tooth decay and jaw problems that would have caused constant pain. The economic records that survive from various gladiatorial schools reveal the calculated nature of this exploitation. Women were assigned monetary values based on their age, health, and skills, with detailed accounting that tracked their productivity like any other resource. These documents show how owners maximized profit by extracting every possible service from their female property, while investing the minimum necessary to keep them alive and functional. Personal effects discovered in the quarters where these women lived provide heartbreaking glimpses into their attempts to maintain humanity in dehumanizing circumstances. Small mirrors, combs, and pieces of jewelry suggest efforts to preserve dignity and femininity despite their degraded status. Letters and writing tablets, when they survive, reveal desperate attempts to maintain contact with family members or record experiences that might otherwise be lost to history. The seasonal nature of gladiatorial games created additional hardships for the women who served the schools. During peak seasons when games were frequent, the demands on their time and energy became overwhelming. They worked without rest to prepare fighters and maintain equipment for multiple events. During off-seasons, when income decreased, their food rations were reduced and medical care became even more scarce than usual. The power dynamics within the ludus created a hierarchy of suffering among the women themselves. Those who had been there longest sometimes gained small privileges that they guarded jealously, leading to conflicts that further fractured any sense of solidarity. This systematic division prevented organized resistance and ensured that women remained focused on individual survival rather than collective action. The training regimens imposed upon gladiators created ripple effects of suffering that extended far beyond the men who wielded the weapons. Women in the ludus found themselves responsible for maintaining the brutal machinery that prepared fighters for death. They spent countless hours sharpening swords that would soon taste blood, polishing armor that might not protect its wearer through the day, and preparing meals that could well be a condemned man's last. The psychological weight of these preparations created a form of complicity that many found unbearable. The architecture of the gladiatorial schools reflected the systematic dehumanization of everyone within their walls. Women's quarters were deliberately positioned in the deepest, most poorly ventilated sections of the underground complexes. Archaeological excavations have revealed chambers barely large enough for a person to lie down, with no provision for privacy or personal space. Multiple women were crammed into these cells, creating conditions that fostered disease and desperation in equal measure. The stone floors, worn smooth by countless bare feet, still bear stains that analysis has revealed to be human blood from injuries both accidental and intentional. The reproductive expectations placed upon these women represented perhaps the most calculated cruelty of the entire system. Owners viewed them as breeding stock for future gladiators, and medical texts from the period reveal disturbing details about techniques used to maximize fertility while minimizing the resources invested in maternal health. Women who failed to produce children faced immediate devaluation, often resulting in sale to establishments where their fate would be even more grim. Those who did bear children discovered that motherhood offered no protection from the demands of their owners. Pregnancy in the ludus brought its own unique horrors. Expectant mothers received no relief from their regular duties until the final stages of labor became unavoidable. They continued preparing food, tending wounds, and maintaining equipment, even as their bodies struggled with the demands of carrying new life in such harsh conditions. Birth took place in the same cramped quarters where they lived, attended only by other women who had learned obstetrics through desperate necessity rather than formal training. Infant mortality rates in gladiatorial schools exceeded even the high standards of Roman society, with many children dying within days of birth from infections, malnutrition, or simple neglect. The legal status of women in the ludus created additional layers of vulnerability that extended beyond their physical circumstances. Roman law provided virtually no protection for slaves, and even free women who had become associated with gladiatorial schools found their legal rights effectively suspended. They could be bought, sold, rented, or killed at their owner's discretion with no legal recourse. Court records from various Roman cities document cases where women were used as stakes in gambling games between ludus owners, their lives literally wagered on the outcomes of dice throws or gladiatorial contests. The seasonal festivals that punctuated the Roman calendar brought intensified suffering for women in the gladiatorial system. During major celebrations like the Saturnalia or the Emperor's birthday games, the demand for spectacle reached fever pitch. Schools competed to provide the most elaborate and deadly entertainment, requiring weeks of preparation that fell largely on the shoulders of their female workforce. These periods saw women working virtually around the clock, maintaining equipment, preparing special costumes, and ensuring that every detail met the expectations of demanding audiences. The medical practices within gladiatorial schools reveal another dimension of the horrors these women faced. They were often used as test subjects for experimental treatments intended for gladiators, since their lives were considered less valuable than those of the trained fighters. Surgical procedures were practiced on them before being attempted on gladiators, whose deaths would represent significant financial losses. Ancient medical texts describe techniques for treating various injuries that were clearly developed through experimentation on unwilling subjects whose consent was never sought or required. The psychological manipulation employed in gladiatorial schools extended far beyond simple intimidation. Women were deliberately kept ignorant of the outside world, preventing them from developing any realistic hope of escape or rescue. They were told stories of former residents who had attempted to flee, with graphic descriptions of the punishments that awaited captured runaways. These tales, whether true or fabricated, created an atmosphere of hopelessness that was more effective than physical restraints in keeping the women compliant. The entertainment value that Romans derived from gladiatorial games extended to the treatment of women associated with the schools. Private parties for wealthy citizens sometimes included tours of the ludus facilities, where guests could observe the living conditions of both gladiators and their female attendants. These voyeuristic exhibitions treated human suffering as a form of amusement, with wealthy Romans placing bets on various aspects of life in the schools, from which gladiator would die next to which woman would break under the psychological pressure first. The economic calculations that governed every aspect of gladiatorial schools created perverse incentives that maximized suffering while minimizing costs. Owners discovered that maintaining women in a state of constant anxiety and desperation actually increased their productivity, as desperate people would work harder to avoid even worse fates. This led to deliberate policies designed to create fear and uncertainty, with punishments administered randomly to ensure that no woman ever felt secure in her position. The religious ceremonies associated with gladiatorial games included rituals that specifically involved the women of the ludus. They were forced to participate in sacrificial offerings before major contests, sometimes required to prepare animals for slaughter, while knowing that the same knives might soon be used on the men they cared for. These ceremonies served to implicate them in the violence of the games, while simultaneously reinforcing their powerlessness to prevent or escape it. The winter months brought particular hardships for women in gladiatorial schools. With fewer games scheduled during the cold season, owners reduced expenditures on heating, food, and medical care. Women who had survived the brutal summers often succumbed to pneumonia, malnutrition, or infections during these lean periods. The stone chambers that had been stifling during summer became deadly cold traps, with inadequate clothing and bedding that offered little protection against the harsh Roman winters. The social hierarchies that developed among the women themselves reflected the corrupting influence of their circumstances. Those who had been in the ludus longest sometimes achieved small positions of authority over newer arrivals, but these promotions came at the cost of enforcing the same brutal system that oppressed them all. This created divisions that prevented solidarity and ensured that resistance remained individual rather than collective, making it easier for owners to maintain control through a combination of fear and false hope. The documentation of daily life in gladiatorial schools reveals the systematic nature of the dehumanization process. Women were assigned numbers rather than names in many records, reducing them to inventory items tracked alongside weapons and animals. Their individual personalities, hopes, and dreams were deliberately suppressed through a combination of overwork, malnutrition, and constant reminders of their expendability. This psychological destruction was often more complete than any physical injury, creating hollow shells of human beings who continued functioning long after their spirits had been broken. The nightfall brought no respite from the horrors that defined existence within the gladiatorial system. As darkness settled over Rome's sprawling network of training schools, the women trapped within these underground labyrinths faced their most vulnerable hours. The absence of daylight transformed already dangerous environments into theaters of predation where the powerful preyed upon the defenseless with impunity. Guards who had maintained professional facades during daylight hours shed all pretense of restraint once the sun disappeared behind the seven hills. The sleeping arrangements within these facilities reflected a calculated cruelty that extended beyond mere overcrowding. Women were deliberately housed in chambers that offered no privacy or security, with entrances that could not be barred from the inside. This architectural vulnerability was no accident, but rather a design feature that ensured constant accessibility to those who held power over their lives. The psychological impact of never feeling safe, even during sleep, created a state of perpetual anxiety that aged these women far beyond their years. Archaeological evidence from recently excavated gladiatorial schools has revealed disturbing modifications to living spaces that speak to the systematic nature of this exploitation. Hidden passages connected various chambers, allowing for movement that bypassed normal corridors and entrances. These secret routes served no legitimate purpose related to training or administration, their existence pointing to activities that required concealment even within an already hidden world of suffering. The dietary control exercised over women in the ludus represented another form of psychological warfare disguised as practical necessity. Food rations were calculated not merely to sustain life, but to maintain a precise balance between functionality and weakness. Women received enough nutrition to perform their duties, but never enough to build the physical strength that might enable resistance or escape. This systematic malnourishment created a dependency that extended beyond the physical, making the promise of additional food a powerful tool for coercing compliance with increasingly degrading demands. The medical experiments conducted within gladiatorial schools extended far beyond simple treatment of combat injuries. Roman physicians viewed the abundant supply of expendable subjects as opportunities to advance their understanding of human anatomy and physiology through methods that would have been unthinkable with citizens of higher status. Women in the ludus found themselves subjected to procedures that served no therapeutic purpose, but rather satisfied the curiosity of medical practitioners eager to expand their knowledge regardless of the human cost. The breeding programs implemented in gladiatorial schools revealed the depths of Roman callousness toward human suffering. Women were paired with specific gladiators based not on any consideration of compatibility or consent, but purely on calculations designed to produce offspring with desired physical characteristics. These arrangements were enforced through a combination of incentives and punishments that left no room for personal choice or preference. The resulting pregnancies were monitored with the same attention given to livestock, with detailed records maintained regarding bloodlines and expected traits. The punishment systems developed specifically for women in gladiatorial schools demonstrated remarkable creativity in the infliction of suffering. Physical violence was carefully calibrated to cause maximum pain while avoiding damage that would interfere with work capacity. More insidious were the psychological torments designed to break spirits without leaving visible marks. Women were forced to witness punishments inflicted on others, creating trauma through observation while simultaneously serving as warnings about the consequences of disobedience. The seasonal variations in treatment reflected the economic priorities of ludus owners with ruthless clarity. During profitable periods when games were frequent and revenues high, conditions improved marginally as owners sought to maintain their human assets in working condition. However, when income declined during off-seasons or economic downturns, women bore the brunt of cost-cutting measures that reduced their circumstances to levels that challenged the very definition of survival. The religious ceremonies forced upon women in gladiatorial schools served multiple purposes beyond simple spiritual manipulation. These rituals created artificial communities bound by shared participation in activities that most found morally repugnant, fostering a sense of collective guilt that made individual resistance more difficult. The ceremonies also provided opportunities for owners to identify women who showed signs of rebellious thinking, as refusal to participate fully marked them for additional scrutiny and punishment. The communication networks that developed among women in different ludus facilities revealed both the human capacity for connection under impossible circumstances and the sophisticated surveillance systems designed to prevent such relationships. Messages passed through chains of sympathetic slaves and occasional freed persons created lifelines of emotional support that helped some women maintain sanity in insane circumstances. However, the discovery of such networks brought swift and brutal retribution that served as object lessons for others who might consider reaching beyond their immediate circumstances. The aging process for women in gladiatorial schools was accelerated by factors that extended far beyond the normal hardships of Roman life. The combination of malnutrition, overwork, constant stress, and repeated trauma created physical deterioration that made 30-year-old women appear decades older. This premature aging served the interests of ludus owners by shortening the period during which they were obligated to maintain their human property, while also providing justification for disposing of women who had become less capable of performing their assigned duties. The economic calculations that governed the lives of these women extended to every aspect of their existence, including their deaths. When women became too sick, injured, or psychologically damaged to continue working, owners faced decisions based purely on financial considerations. The cost of medical treatment was weighed against the potential for recovery and return to productivity, with the scales heavily tilted toward disposal rather than healing. Those deemed beyond economic usefulness faced fates that ranged from abandonment to more active forms of elimination. The cultural impact of gladiatorial schools on Roman society extended far beyond the immediate confines of the arenas and training facilities. The normalization of extreme cruelty toward women within these institutions contributed to broader social attitudes that devalued female life and dignity. Citizens who attended games or visited ludus facilities became desensitized to human suffering through repeated exposure, carrying this callousness into their daily interactions with slaves, servants, and family members. The legal frameworks that governed gladiatorial schools contained provisions that specifically addressed the treatment of women, but these regulations served to protect the property rights of owners rather than the welfare of the women themselves. Laws specified penalties for damaging another person's female slaves, but offered no protection against abuse by the legitimate owner. This legal structure created an environment where the most extreme cruelties were perfectly lawful as long as they were inflicted by the appropriate person. The documentation that survives from this period includes disturbing details about the disposal of women who died within gladiatorial schools. Unlike gladiators whose deaths in the arena carried a certain honor and whose bodies were sometimes claimed by admirers, women who perished in the ludus were typically discarded with no more ceremony than would be accorded to dead animals. Mass graves discovered near former gladiatorial sites contain remains that tell stories of lives that ended in anonymity and indignity. The psychological profiles that emerge from contemporary accounts reveal the long-term mental health consequences of life in gladiatorial schools. Women who survived these experiences and were eventually freed or sold to other situations often displayed symptoms that modern medicine would recognize as severe trauma disorders. They struggled with basic social interactions, experienced persistent nightmares, and demonstrated hypervigilance that made normal relationships impossible. The damage inflicted by their experiences proved to be lifelong, affecting not only the women themselves, but also any children they might bear in the future. The escape attempts that occasionally occurred despite overwhelming obstacles provide insights into both the desperation that drove such actions and the systematic barriers designed to prevent them. Women who fled gladiatorial schools faced immediate pursuit by professional slave hunters equipped with dogs and extensive knowledge of hiding places throughout the Roman territories. Recapture brought punishments designed to deter others from similar attempts, with public displays of torture serving as educational experiences for the remaining population of the Ludus. The networks of complicity that enabled these atrocities extended throughout Roman society in ways that revealed the empire's moral bankruptcy at its very foundations. Wealthy matrons who attended gladiatorial games as fashionable entertainment knew precisely where the women serving refreshments had come from and what their lives entailed, yet they participated eagerly in systems that perpetuated such suffering. These elite Roman women often purchased personal slaves from gladiatorial schools, specifically seeking those who had been broken by their experiences and would therefore pose no threat to household stability. The financial records that survived from major ludus operations reveal the calculated precision with which human misery was monetized. Women were depreciated as assets over time, with their value declining according to formulas that accounted for age, health, and psychological condition. When a woman's worth dropped below a certain threshold, standard business practices dictated her disposal through methods that maximized recovery of investment while minimizing ongoing expenses. These calculations were performed with the same dispassionate efficiency applied to worn equipment or aging livestock. The ruins of the Colosseum still stand today, drawing millions of visitors who marvel at the engineering that created Rome's greatest spectacle. Yet beneath those ancient stones lie the forgotten graves of countless women whose names were never recorded in marble, whose suffering was never commemorated in song, whose sacrifice brought no glory for the empire that consumed them. Their stories remind us that behind every monument to power lies a foundation built upon the bones of the powerless. As we walk through these ruins, we walk above the final resting place of those who paid the true price of Rome's entertainment. Their silence echoes still, demanding that we remember not just the gladiators who died for glory, but the women who died for nothing more than the misfortune of existing in their shadow.